The following are defenses to intentional torts. Consent. A defense to all intentional torts if plaintiff consents to defendant's otherwise tortious conduct, defendant is not liable for that act. Capacity is required. Plaintiff must be capable of consenting. So things that would impair it, you couldn't be drunk, mentally impaired. Young children are incapable of consenting to tortious conduct. Express consent. Plaintiff gives defendant verbal or written consent, and this is nullified by duress, fraud, or mistake. Implied consent is when defendant can reasonably infer plaintiff's consent based on custom or plaintiff's observable conduct. Often arises if plaintiff participates in an activity or goes to a place where torts are common. If plaintiff plays tackle football, plaintiff has given implied consent to certain forms of battery. Consent is usually implied for ordinary contacts of daily life, such as brushing against someone on a crowded sidewalk or public transportation. Consent is usually implied for ordinary contact of daily life. Facts must indicate that based on plaintiff's objective conduct, defendant was reasonable in interpreting plaintiff's consent. Scope of consent. Defendant can be held liable for conduct that exceeds the scope of plaintiff's valid consent, whether expressed or implied. Another defense is self-defense, defense of others, or defense of property. Requirement for all defenses. Reasonable belief. Defendant must reasonably believe a tort is being or about to be committed. 2. Proper timing. Tort must be in progress or imminent. 3. Reasonable force. Must be proportionate to the threat or harm. Deadly force is allowed if defendant reasonably believes a life is in danger, never permitted to protect property alone. Self-defense. No duty to retreat, except in a minority of jurisdictions impose a duty to retreat before using deadly force, if retreat can be done safely. Only available to initial aggressor. If initial threat has been terminated or defendant responds to non-deadly force with deadly force. Defense of others. Defendant must have reasonable belief that the person he is aiding would have the right of self-defense. Defendant may use as much force as he could have used if the injury was threatened to him, such as if he was acting in self-defense. Defense of property. Available to prevent tort against property. Reasonable force may be used, but force that is deadly or causes serious bodily harm is not allowed for defense of property alone. Unavailable if initial actor had a privilege to enter land, such as recapturing chattel. Reasonable mistake is only allowed to whether an intrusion occurred, not whether privilege existed. Another defense is necessity, which is a defense to torts against property, trespass to land, trespass to chattel, or conversion, in which defendant damages plaintiff's property in an effort to avoid greater danger. The requirements are: 1, that defendant's interference with plaintiff's property must reasonably necessary to avoid imminent threats to injury. And 2, threatened injury must be more serious than the interference undertaken to avert it. Public necessity is an absolute defense. Defendant's invasion of plaintiff's property must be reasonably necessary to protect the community or a large group of people. This is an absolute defense. Plaintiff cannot recover any damages. Private necessity is a limited defense. Defendant invades plaintiff's property to protect his own property or sell or for self or small group. This is a limited defense in that plaintiff can only recover damages for actual harm to defendant's property unless defendant trespassed for plaintiff's benefit. Property owner liability. If an owner repels or expels a trespasser who interfered with or invaded owner's property out of a valid necessity, such as plaintiff seeks shelter from a terrible storm, owner will be liable for any damages caused. Another defense is recapture of chattels. Defendant has a legal privilege to use peaceful means to recover possession of chattel taken unlawfully and to use reasonable, non-deadly force in a fresh pursuit of chattel taker. Also a defense to assault and battery and false imprisonment. Limitations and requirements are that defendant owner must make a timely demand for return of chattel. The exception is not required if making demand would be futile or dangerous. Defendant owner may recapture the original wrongdoer or a third person who knows the chattel was wrongfully obtained. Recapture is not available if chattel is in the hands of an innocent party. Use of force. Reasonable force may be used to recapture chattel only in fresh pursuit of one who has wrongfully obtained possession. No deadly force or serious bodily harm is permitted.